On August 26, 1346, on a muddy slope in northern France, the world changed forever. 500 years of armored dominance, 5 centuries of knights crushing everything in their path, ended in a single bloody afternoon. And the men who did it? They weren't nobles, they weren't princes. They were peasants with wooden bows, standing in the rain, about to rewrite the rules of war itself. Picture this: 9,000 exhausted English soldiers backed against a hill near the village of Crécy, staring down at over 30,000 of Europe's finest warriors waiting below. The French nobles weren't even worried. They were arguing over who would get to kill the English king first. They saw this as a tournament, a stage for glory, another chance to prove what they'd always known, that steel and courage made them immortal, that history belonged to them. They were wrong, dead wrong. This wasn't just a battle. This was the collapse of everything medieval warfare stood for. The moment when armor failed, when courage wasn't enough, when an entire social order began to die. But to understand how it all fell apart, you have to understand how it started. Europe in the mid-14th century wasn't at peace. It was a web of dynasties, oaths and inherited claims, all enforced by steel. And at the center of it all was a question that would ignite a war lasting over a century. Who had the right to rule France? Edward III of England believed he did. His mother was Isabella of France, and through her he had a claim to the French throne. To the English, this was legitimate inheritance. To the French nobility, it was unthinkable. In 1337, Philip VI of France rejected Edward's claim outright, and the 100 Years' War began. Not a single conflict, but a generational struggle for legitimacy, fought in blood and fire across the French countryside. Edward didn't want a fair fight, not at first. What he wanted was to humiliate France, to prove that Philip couldn't even protect his own people. So in the summer of 1346, Edward launched what the French called a chevauchée, a campaign of calculated vandalism with a political purpose. He landed in Normandy with his army and moved fast and light, burning villages, destroying crops, looting towns. This wasn't mindless destruction. Every column of smoke on the horizon was a political weapon, proof that the French king was powerless. The chronicler Jean Froissart described the panic that spread through the region as Edward's forces carved a path of ruin. The message was clear: your king cannot save you. Philip VI had no choice but to respond. He summoned his vassals from across France and beyond: princes, dukes, counts, allied kings from Bohemia, nobles from the Low Countries. This wasn't just a French army. This was a coalition of Europe's feudal elite, men who had been bred for war since childhood, who wore armor worth more than the lifetime output of entire peasant villages, who rode war horses trained as weapons. For 5 centuries, cavalry charges had decided battles. For 5 centuries, armored knights had been the ultimate military force. The French weren't worried. They saw Crécy not as a risk, but as destiny. Edward knew better. He knew this battle wouldn't be won by courage. It would be won by preparation. It would be won before it even began. Outnumbered 3-1, exhausted from weeks of marching, Edward didn't try to run. He chose the ground. Near the village of Crécy, he positioned his army on a gentle slope, forcing the French to attack uphill through soft, churned earth. He divided his forces into 3 defensive divisions and arranged 5,000 English and Welsh longbowmen in a wide V-shape, overlapping their fields of fire, to create what was essentially a funnel of death. Any enemy advancing into that formation would be hit from multiple angles at once. And then Edward did something that shocked even his own men. He ordered his knights to dismount. These were men raised to fight from horseback, men whose horses were worth more than gold, and now they were being told to fight on foot, shoulder to shoulder with peasants. Froissart recorded the disbelief within the English ranks. This was the abandonment of centuries of chivalric tradition. But Edward didn't care about tradition. He cared about survival, and he knew that pride would get his men killed. As night fell, the English worked. They drove sharpened wooden stakes into the ground, angled toward the enemy. They dug ditches and shallow pits under torchlight, invisible from a distance. And then the weather intervened. Dark clouds rolled in and rain began to fall. For the French, it was an inconvenience. For the English, it was an opportunity. Longbows require dry strings to maintain their power and range. The English archers unstrung their bows and tucked the strings under their cloaks and helmets. The Genoese crossbowmen hired by the French did not. Modern experiments have confirmed what the English knew in 1346. Wet strings lose range and penetrating power dramatically. While the English ate and rested and waited, the French arrived late, hungry and impatient. The trap was complete. The next morning, Philip VI made the smart call. He ordered his army to wait, to rest, to prepare. His men ignored him. French nobles surged forward, shouting, lowering lances, desperate not to miss their chance at glory. Once the first ranks moved, discipline collapsed. The army became a crowd. The Genoese crossbowmen advanced first, 5,000 professionals hired at great cost, but their pavis shields were still with the baggage train, and their bowstrings had been soaked by the rain. They fired, and most of their bolts fell short. Then the English responded. 5,000 longbowmen released together. The sound was described as thunder. The sky darkened. Each archer could fire 12 arrows per minute. That's over 60,000 arrows per minute, falling like steel rain. The Genoese broke and ran, and here's where it gets truly horrific. As the Genoese fled back toward the French lines, a French noble shouted, "Kill this rabble blocking our way!" Mounted knights charged into their own mercenaries, trampling them, slashing them apart. Friendly fire on a scale almost unimaginable. Then 12,000 armored knights advanced uphill, through the mud, over the bodies of their own allies. At long range, the arrows struck the horses. Even armored horses had vulnerable eyes, mouths, legs. Wounded horses didn't charge forward. They screamed, they reared, they collapsed and became half-ton obstacles. The momentum vanished. At close range, the devastation intensified. The English archers used bodkin arrowheads, narrow points designed to punch through the weak points in armor. Visors, joints, armpits, thighs. Modern ballistic testing has shown that even non-penetrating hits were devastating. The blunt force impact of an arrow striking steel plate was like being hit with a hammer, over and over and over again. Jean Froissart recorded 16 separate charges. 16 times the French knights threw themselves uphill into that storm of arrows, each wave more chaotic than the last. Horses fell into the hidden ditches. Knights crashed into the sharpened stakes. The mud, churned by thousands of hooves and feet, became a trap itself. Dismounted knights in 60 pounds of armor could barely stand, let alone fight. When the archers ran out of arrows, they didn't retreat. They ran forward, pulled arrows from the dead and dying, and fired them back. The French were being killed by their own steel, their own arrows. And through it all, one final act of chivalric honor played out. The blind king of Bohemia, who had been blind for 10 years, rode forward with his knights. He refused to flee. He declared that the king of Bohemia does not run from battle. His knights tied their reins to his horse and led him into the slaughter. They died together, swords raised, unable to see the arrows that killed them. It was the last pure gesture of the chivalric age, and it vanished into the mud of Crécy. When night fell, the English didn't celebrate. They stayed where they stood, and any wounded Frenchman who moved was killed. The next morning, they counted the dead. 1,500 French nobles, princes, counts, dukes, men whose names defined entire regions, erased in a single afternoon. Philip VI himself had been wounded, an arrow striking his jaw, and his guards had dragged him from the field as he tried to return to the fight. The sacred oriflamme banner, said to guarantee victory, was abandoned in the mud. English losses, around 40 men total, only 2 knights. 1 English knight dead for every 100 French nobles. The disparity was so extreme that some contemporaries refused to believe it. Some spoke of divine judgment, of miracles. There weren't enough surviving nobles to bury the dead with proper rites. Bodies rotted for days. Crows and wolves fed on princely flesh. Local peasants stripped armor worth fortunes and melted down steel that had failed its owners. Entire regions had lost their lords overnight. Feudal administration collapsed. Laws went unenforced. Power vacuums spread. Crécy wasn't just a battlefield. It was a social shockwave. For centuries, war had preserved the noble class, had been their ultimate expression of power. At Crécy, war devoured them. The battle didn't end the 100 Years' War, but it ended an era. France didn't collapse overnight, but it was shaken to its foundations. So many nobles died that entire regions were left leaderless. The illusion of noble invincibility was gone. Slowly, painfully, France began to change. More infantry, more missile troops, more fighting on foot. Armor became heavier, then pointless. Cavalry charges became rarer, then suicidal. But old habits die slowly. 10 years later at Poitiers, French knights repeated the same mistakes, charging uphill into prepared English positions. They lost another king. The lesson was brutal and simple. Courage cannot defeat mathematics. Nobility cannot stop arrows. Honor does not negate physics. Modern military historians look at Crécy and see a revolution. Prepared defensive positions, disciplined, sustained firepower, combined arms working as a system. Every principle of modern warfare appeared on that field. Not in a laboratory, not in a military academy, on a muddy slope in 1346. And here's the irony. The longbow that killed chivalry was itself temporary. It required a lifetime of training to use effectively. When gunpowder weapons arrived, tools that any peasant could learn to use in weeks, the longbow faded into history. Progress destroys its own weapons. The image that haunts me most isn't the arrows or the bodies. It's the contrast. French nobles trampling their own allies to reach glory. English peasants standing calmly in formation, shooting as they'd practiced every Sunday after church. One side saw war as theatre. The other saw it as work. One side fought for honor. The other fought to survive. And on that muddy slope near Crécy, survival won. The medieval world died there, killed by men who were never supposed to matter, using weapons that nobles had dismissed as peasant tools. Which makes you wonder, if one battle could erase an entire way of war, which other battles ended an era? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more moments where history broke apart.